Thank you for the invitation. It's a beautiful city, especially right now. I have to apologize for not speaking Italian. I do speak a little bit of Italian, but I don't have the vocabulary for it. I spoke Italian up until the age of 7, that I learned from my grandmother that left Italy in the 40s, so I sound like Clark Gable with a little Venetian accent and a very strong Swiss accent, which you'll be laughing all along the presentation, but not because of the contents, but because of the form. And maybe the context should be upfront today. I would like to talk about how design is putting thoughts into things. And I will explain that with a short history of hackers and priests. It's a presentation that I held just a couple of days ago in Berlin, at FIFO Berlin. I changed it a lot, improved it a lot, I hope. I was so nervous when I held this presentation that I forgot the whole second part. So it has 2 parts. The first part is theory, the second part is practice. It seemed to me that this subject is so difficult that I feel I can't get to the top. It felt like I have to climb a very difficult mountain for the first time. And when I reached it, the theoretical part, I was so happy scared, maybe that's a Japanese expression, that I just ran off the stage without saying thank you, without showing what everybody was coming to see, which is the new version of Writer for Mac. So this time, if I run off the stage, please don't come and catch me. It could be the same case, because I'm very nervous. I managed to explain it once, but it's like going up the Mount Everest. If you go up once, it doesn't mean you can come back the second time. So let's get started. In my biography, you won't find any design school except for Design School Basel, where I didn't study but teach. I taught how to use Microsoft Office, which is maybe more complicated than design, but that's beside the point. I actually studied philosophy and teaching stupid computer programs was a way for me to finance my studies. So I studied philosophy, actually honestly, because I fell in love with a girl that I knew went to that philosophy course. But the official version is that I studied philosophy because I wanted to know whether my mind is in the world or whether the world is in my mind. Sounds like a game of words, but it's actually quite an intriguing problem. I won't go too much into it because it drives you crazy. It's something that drove philosophers crazy for a couple of thousands of years, and it drove me crazy as well after 7 years of studying philosophy. And now I'm 40, and overall, if you count all the years that my brain tries to figure out where it is in the world, where the world is in it, it took me 40 years of thinking to find a way to hack this problem. So this is not an answer to all philosophers. This is just me thinking that I found a way out, and probably in a couple of weeks I'll find that it's just a deeper trap that I fell into. But here's what I found out. So after 10 years of studying philosophy at university and 12 years of designing things, I found out that some things are designed. Which is a great thing that few people know, especially philosophers don't know that. Because philosophers look at the world like this. They look at the world that is not designed. And they find all kinds of problems. So they ask questions like, what is this? It's a fucking stone, right? But no, they're like, okay, it's a stone, but what is it really? What's the idea of this thing? What is the essence of the stone? There is no essence, it's a stone. But the difference between what we've seen before and just a stone is massive. And the difference is actually design. Now, Thinking is putting things into thought. If you put things into thought, it's very painful because things are actually out there. You have to get them in. You look at them, and then scientists say the light comes into your eyes, and in your eyes, something magical happens, and then between the eyes and your brains, there's like cables and stuff, and then suddenly, it becomes a thought. I always thought, that's kind of strange, because that's not how it feels. One thing that we know for sure is that by designing, we put thought into things. If someone makes a hammer, it's not a big mystery what a hammer is. It's not what's the idea of a hammer, what's the essence of a hammer. It's very clear because the thought precedes the object. You design a hammer, you know exactly what it is, what it's supposed to be, and there is no such philosophical problem, what's the essence of a hammer, because the essence comes before the object. So, the stones, it happened, and the hammer, or if you want to, the knife, is made. What this is a speculation. You have to try to find a way to get closer to this thing, to look at it from all sides. And here you know exactly what it is, because it's here because of your intention to be clean. The hammer is in thought. It somehow finds a way into your brain. I think the explanation that natural science gives is kind of weak. And this thing is something that is thought through. So your thought penetrates the object that you design, which is a beautiful feeling if you compare it to all the pain you have when you look at the world from a natural scientist's point of view or from a philosopher's point of view. So you could actually say that the difference between subject and object disappears in good design. If you have good design, the thing that the designer wanted to do, thought, is just right there. It's one. And also good design, especially good interaction design, is where subject and subject are linked. So if you use a program that works really well, you can feel the designer on the other side that was thinking. So whenever you use something that's well designed, you're together with the designer. And this is, this is part of what where designers feel some happiness, because you're really close to people like Massimo Micheli, when you look at this thing and use it. So now what the philosophers forget, because they don't design things, is that what is the world? It's not such a difficult question. Because if you look around, most of the world is actually designed. It's thought and made. It's not a big mystery. Like around here, there are a few things that are not designed. Noses, but in the States, you can be sure about noses if they're not designed. This is kind of shocking, because if you live like in a city like Tokyo, it's like the Matrix. There's almost nothing that is not designed. But don't fool yourself, in Milan it's not so different. The fact that you have a tree there doesn't mean the tree is not designed. It's placed there, it's cut. It's not a completely mysterious object. It's already very close to a design object. Now, of course, we all know that not all artifacts are thought through. Actually, most artifacts, most of our world is really sloppily designed and badly thought, almost not thought. And here, a German text that illustrates that problem between thought through or well designed and badly designed pretty well is in 1980, a Swiss newspaper wrote a big poem about the Fukushima power plants. And they said, that's these people look ahead. These people are very careful. These people know what they're doing. And you should see them cleaning the power plants. When they clean Fukushima starts to shine. It's one beauty we can learn from the Japanese. And actually, it's a little bit different in reality. So it's not as well designed. It's not as thought through as they thought. So one more time. And this is actually the most difficult part. The mountain I'm about to climb is very steep, but here then it is. How are things things designed by thinking and making. This is a very different occupation from philosophers that just try to reach the world by thinking and never by making. And doing things, that's what I learned. So, the problem now, where, I said before, maybe it's just a deeper trap I got myself into. If that sounds all very simple, philosophers put things into thought, and designers put thought into things. Seems easy, okay, we can overcome, but actually, the problem is that thoughts are artifacts as well, they're artificial. Thoughts are not natural. If they were natural, they wouldn't be that painful. If they were natural and painful, there'd be a sickness. Maybe that's the case, but thoughts are designed. But how are thoughts made? How are they designed? You see the philosopher, getting back into this thing here, and they're made through language. This is something that I learned, the one big thing I learned at university in those 7 years, is that there is no such thing as, an emotional thought. There's no such thing as an emotional thought. It's either an emotion or it's a thought. There's something before the thought, which is an emotion. There's no emotion. But there are different languages. There is, sign language, body language, verbal language, musical language, mathematical language, visual language. So you could actually think without words spelled out in verbal language. But there is no emotional thought. That's something that's very important. It's always a form of language. There are so many beautiful forms of language, and to forget that when we talk about language, thinking that it's only words spelled out. But let's focus. Let's look at verbal language because it's the one that we know best and the one we can describe best because we use language to describe. Like I said in the beginning, there's some form of an emotion that seems to be the most inner core of the thought. And then there's internal language. Usually when you use verbal language, inside your head, you actually spell out words. It surprises me often that when I tell this to people, they're like, I don't think so. My brain is special. My brain doesn't need words, doesn't need language, just thinks. No, it doesn't. What you mean is that you can also think with visual language or with musical language. But when you talk about verbal thought, it's always words spelled out in your brain. The next phase is that you speak these words out. What's hard to understand is language seems to be first of all something that happens between people, but as a matter of fact, it sometimes starts inside you, though you learned it. So spoken language is the next phase, and there is something that also many designers tend to forget, that there's a massive difference between the spoken and the written language. And the last volume of language is something that very few people know. Here, designers again are very aware of that. It's writing itself. Designers know that depending on what kind of type you use, a text sounds different. It's like the intonation in language. And so, often people ask what's first, and it seems, emotion, then internal language, then spoken language, then written language, then writing is more or less a thing that makes sense. But as a matter of fact, there's also the other way around. When you read something, then the writing is first. First thing you see is the typography. And then, you pick up the written language, pick up what it would mean, when it were real language, spoken language. It enters your brain, and, you feel something. But it's not that easy either, because, as a matter of fact, these things are interdependent. Depending on, what type you use for something, the meaning changes. Depending on how you speak something, people thinking in a different way. Yeah. And it gets really complicated when you look at all the interdependencies because, the typography can change emotion, the way you think. All these different levels talk to each other. They influence each other. The fact that, for instance, it's impossible to learn Swiss German has a lot to do with the fact that there's no written language. So there is no pattern for the spoken language where everybody knows, yeah, actually that's how it should be. When you learn Italian, standard Italian, you have this blueprint of written language with grammar, with proper words you have to use. It's not pomi but mele in real Italian, right? And many rules that somebody established that changes the way you think, that changes the way you speak, that changes the way even use type. Certain written standards require different typographical little details. So all these levels all need to communicate with each other, and it's quite a mess. So you can see the trap here opening up. So there's no real first, because all these things influence each other all the time. But we know one thing. The most clearly designed language, the most obvious language, is the written language, because it is the kind of language we use most often, and it's the kind of language that most people have been working on building over the thousands of years to reach a certain point. It gets very difficult to know exactly what they meant. There's a lot of interpretation with visual language, and it depends highly from which culture you come from, how you interpret something like this. So in order to find out how thoughts are designed, ultimately we take an example, of written language. In other words, writing, not typography. There's a big difference between the two. Typography is just what is set and what produces repeatable patterns. There's also handwriting, which plays a big role in the history of writing. So we start here. That's more or less random. I talked to a couple of people at Typo Berlin, and they said, oh, it's not the first writing, there's much more you should talk about. But most know the cuneiform script. It's 3,000 years before Christ. So what is important when you talk about the history of writing is that you see the massive distances that we're talking about. We're talking about 5,000 years back, which is really a long time ago if you look at the history of our contemporary writing. What is important also when you see this, this is very impressive. These people have a lot of power. This couldn't be some, cleaning lady that was bored or something. There's a lot of structure in there. There's a lot of power working in stone, and it already tells you that history is written by those who define writing, by those who control the code of writing. And the first script that more people are familiar with visually are the hieroglyphs, and the hieroglyphs are in the beginning a mere representation of power, right? Few people could read, few people could write. So if you walk by one of these things, as a normal person back 3,000 years before Christ, it would just be like, yeah, there's someone really smart and impressive here doing some stuff. I had a similar impression when I first moved to Japan 8 years ago, and I saw all these signs. First of all, there is no noise anymore, no advertising, no bullshit, that reaches your ears from all sides, no bullshit that reaches you through your eyes. And you look at these, Japanese signs, and you're like, that must be very, very important stuff. That can't be trivial. That can be in a world where cars are fast. There's one cars even faster than Toyota. So it can't happen, right? No bullshit. Because when you don't understand science, you always imagine these people must be really smart and clever to be able to write in such complicated ways, which leads a lot of idiots to the point where they think they're more impressive when they use a kanji on their arm as a tattoo, where they don't know what it means. In the best case, sometimes it just says jerk. And that's exactly the function of secret writing. It transports power. Now what happens is, so a couple of people came up with these signs, and developed them over hundreds of thousands of years. And then, the priests or the scribes that were in charge of this, they said, let's make it a little bit easier because I know they, want to show how smart they are, but we have to write and we have to write down their lives. So let's make it a little bit so, just among us, don't tell anyone that it's easier, but try to make it a little bit easier. And then, the priests developed their own hieratic script, which still is awfully complicated. And they also tried to make it a little bit more complicated over time. In the end, they had about 6,000 symbols writing that script. And that's, where it gets interesting. No matter how much you try to hide the code, we've seen that in the Second World War as well, with all the encryption, the Germans the Germans are not stupid with these things. They try to really encrypt things hard, the Japanese as well. But sooner or later, there will be a hacker that hacks the code. And that's what happened to the hieratic script. So, around 600, it took a long time. We're talking 3,000 to 600. That's 2,500 years. It's really a long time, but they hacked it. And they developed demotic, or in other words, popular script, the same word as democracy here. And these were hackers, right? They used 23 symbols, away from 6,000. And I think they had a lot of fun. You can tell that there's a little bit more action going on. Other one, you can feel that. So, if you look at writing over time, you can see that back and forth between the priests and the hackers. One hacker population that we know very well, and that is very proud to describe themselves as hacker. They even say they hacked the sea, that were the Israelites, and they developed their own, even more simplified form of writing around the 10th century before Christ. And then the real hackers came. That's like Matrix style, hardcore hacker dudes. And that's these guys. They write on, it seems kind of lazy. If you look at the writing, it's a little bit like, maybe southern Italy, they're like, yeah, I write, and yeah, this guy should die, I write his name on clay. So around 740 before Christ, they hacked the Hebrew script, and what happened, right? They actually didn't just hack it, they also used that language to build amazing stuff, like democracy to begin with, theater, philosophy, also in terms of technology, they were an amazing population. A few people know that, but the first steam engine was in the bibliothèque gardens of Alexandria, throwing balls up in the air. So hackers, they do not just change the code, they alter the laws, they open new possibilities, and here's an example from the 5th century before Christ, and this is about as simple as it gets. Of course, it has a lot to do with the material they were writing on, but you still have to develop a writing system that is as simple as this. We can almost read this even if you don't know, the Greek alphabet. So whenever the hackers come and make things simpler, the priests look at it patiently from afar, and they're like, yeah, thank you very much for inventing so much new technology. I think we can use that for ourselves as well. But now it's our turn. And, the Romans came and they said, we're not going to make things all too complicated now because, we're dealing with so many smart Greek people that also hang out here, and they might find out that we try to make things more complicated. We're just going to add a little just simple things, And we need that because when you have the stone, which we need to show our power, Senatus, Populus, whatever, you have to have that everywhere to show, who's in charge. Of course, the people are there too, but first it's the Senate and the people, they're very, very smart, delicate, reintroducing some complexity, right? And that's the turning point. So you have 3,000 years up until the Romans where things got simpler, and now the priests were back in power, making things much, much more. That's just the beginning. Now, there are some hackers up north, you know, the Germans with the deep voices and the big muscles, and you know, they sometimes come into the Roman Empire and they destroy everything, and you know, some of them destroy the writing as well. The German word for letter Buchstaben means actually, you know, a stick from a certain tree, and then you know they use these letters as they remember them to like throw them in the air and read like you know oracles from it. They were making a mess. Further up north, that's an example from Denmark. They all actually trying to use the writing as well to make sense. But in general, that's a pretty evil horde of hackers there. They'll come in later, you know, because the priests are patient and they say, wait, we're not going to let these barbarians get away with runes. We're going to go really hardcore. Now you have a counter movement through the Greeks, where you know that's just the first step. Right? It's already pretty hard to read, and then you know patience also leads to beauty. That's the argument of the priests, and they're kind of right because you know this is already pretty beautiful. It's over the years. Yeah, time does its thing, but you can imagine how beautiful that was. This is where they got in the end. So the priests, you know, they writing these, and they were very precise. They didn't make any spelling errors or forget any pieces or so. They were very precise. But the writing form was so complicated and so diverse that it almost became like a doctor's handwriting. And if you remember in the beginning, of course, that helps you regarding the power. If you read from something like this, you know, and say that's God who said that, you're fantastic. You must be magic. You must be really superior. Of course, most people wouldn't even get to the point where they see this kind of writing. They would just like, you read from something that is like, wow. And, but again, you know, there was quite a long period from zero to the 8th century. But then, you know, you have the first big Caesar coming back, the first big king coming back.